Well, my husband, Jake, was on a business trip. I was having lunch with my mother-in-law, Susan, when Jake called me. Megan, listen. My husband had lied about his mother collapsing to cover up his affair, so I joined forces with my mother-in-law to expose him and steal everything. I questioned him. Aren't you supposed to be on a business trip? And he said, well, the trip went smoothly, but something serious has come up. My mother had actually fainted, and as I looked up, Susan, who was seated in front of me, widened her eyes in amazement. Went on, you know the route back from my trip goes past the family home. I'm going to head there now and take care of Mom. I looked at Susan once again, and she signaled to me to be silent about her presence by putting her index finger to her lips. I chose to comply with Jake's tale. So is your mother okay? Should I come too? After realizing her intentions. No, you don't like my mom, I said. But it's okay, my mom doesn't like you too. She believes you're a wife who doesn't listen. Is it okay that you don't have to come? I clenched my fists in trepidation as I answered, and the phone ended. I was already suspicious that Jake was lying, probably over something he couldn't tell me. Could it be an affair? Susan said, so what? Should we do now, Megan? Susan, I questioned, is this about him having another woman? Sadly, it appears that he has someone else, but don't worry, Megan, I'm with you. And thanks to Susan's encouraging remarks, I felt prepared to find out the truth. My name is Megan, and I'm 30 years old, working housewife in my second year of marriage. I write from home, specializing in travel-related articles, using my previous experience working at a travel agency. I met Jake through a college friend, Kevin's recommendation. Jake, a coworker Kevin had promised to introduce me to, works for a small to mid-sized company and is fairly normal save for his somewhat above-average appearance. We dated happily for nearly 2 years before he proposed on my birthday, and I accepted. We went to see Jake's family after seeing my parents to obtain their approval for our marriage. His parents were separated, and his father had moved overseas, leaving just his mother, Susan, at the family home. I was first anxious to meet her because I knew she was a nice to meet you, and Megan. And I'm in a relationship with Jake, I said as I greeted the self-made CEO of her own business. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Come in, come in. With her youthful short hair and direct manner, Susan answered anxiously as I sat down. Mom, I want to marry her, he stated in response to Jake. Well, if you two have decided, I won't oppose. Susan smiled and replied, congratulations, which made me feel more at ease. Then the topic of my employment came up. What type of work do you do, Megan? Susan's expression suddenly clouded over when I said, a writer from home, is that really okay? What do you mean? She questioned. I'm a freelance writer. Mostly I'm just at home on my computer. I remarked, well, isn't that sort of like a hobby? It must be unstable income-wise. That's not true. I consider it a legitimate job. Susan was still dubious, but she accepted that a secure job, such as a full-time position, would be preferable. If she didn't object to our marriage, Susan continued to frown even if she didn't fully understand my profession. I'm passionate about my current job, so I insisted that Jake step in at that point, and let's just leave it at that. Since home was just a 2-hour drive from Susan's, I reasoned that we wouldn't need to see her very often. As a result, Jake and I got married and everything went smoothly. Kevin, who had first introduced us, provided a speech that made the ceremony amazing, and so my life with Jake began, which in the first year I thought was a happy new married life. He helped out around the house, but as the second year went on, Jake began to arrive home late, claiming to have hectic work schedules. Despite this, I supported him without question, and occasionally I met Susan, who would always advise, why not work as a full-time employee? Why not get some qualifications? One day, fed up with Susan's constant remarks, I told Jake, I admire your mom, but she makes me uncomfortable around her, constantly critiques my work. I was grateful that he never made me listen to Susan or get along with her one day while I was working from home. Well, Mom is from an older generation. You don't have to force a relationship, he said. Susan, who I hadn't seen in a long time, answered the phone when it called. I was hesitant at first, but I knew I couldn't ignore her, so I said hello. What's up, Megan? I asked. She started, Susan, I wanted to chat with you about your work today. Please, I've had enough. I interrupted, but it wasn't because I wished to express regret. To my surprise, Susan saw an essay I published in a travel magazine. After doing some research, she discovered that I was a well-known author who contributed to multiple magazines. I read your piece, and it was fantastic. She thanked me, and I apologized if I may have looked down on the writing industry, but after seeing your talent and success, I'm ashamed that I was mistaken. I'm sorry. Aside from her criticism of my work, I've always regarded and even loved Susan's apology. Although it's not quite an apology, I felt relieved for her personally, as if our previous arguments were coming to an end. Susan suggested that since I'll be in your town soon, we go out to lunch. If you don't want to, that's completely okay. But I'd love to. No, Susan, I'm thrilled to hear more about your work, she said. Please, let's have lunch together, I consented, and 3 days later we set up a lunch date at a restaurant in my town. I wanted to tell Jake about it, but he was being, as usual, busy with work, and having left for a business trip, I was curious about Jake's reaction the next morning. I assumed that since his mom and I had enjoyed a nice lunch together while he was away, he would be content at the moment. Therefore, on the day of the lunch, we got ready and went to our meeting place, Megan, over here. Susan smiled and waved to me as I walked up, saying, I'm sorry again for all the trouble I've caused over your job. It's all right, I said. Susan, let's enjoy the day together. I'm happy to hear that you're free to order anything you want. One of the benefits of being CEO is that you get to do something you wouldn't normally do. Oh, Megan, you're such a fun person, Susan said, and we both laughed as we walked inside the restaurant and conversed. After hearing Susan's divorce experience, I started to recognize the positive aspects of her that I hadn't previously noticed, and I came to deeply admire her as a strong, capable, and compassionate person. Susan remarked, when I got divorced, I was so fortunate to have my job. It really helped me appreciate that the value of money and the necessity of women working. I genuinely thought, is that why you encouraged me to get a full-time job? I said yes, because I didn't want you to suffer in case something went wrong. But now that I see it, Megan, I'm doing great. And I'm glad you understand that I'll work hard like you, Susan, I replied. It's Jake. I wonder what's up, I said as my phone rang. Jake's on a business trip, right? Yes, Susan said. Just in case, I'll put it on speaker so you can hear. After I put the phone on speaker and put it on the table, Jake's voice interrupted to deliver the startling news of Susan's alleged breakdown. Susan and I first discussed our next course of action. We ought to inquire with his business. When Susan reminded me of Kevin, a common buddy who worked at Jake's company, I messaged him because I needed to talk. He answered, can we meet after work today? Susan and I drove to the chosen pub, and Kevin was taken aback to find Susan there. However, he spoke up after we had discussed everything, and when I checked with Jake's department, they claimed he was on paid vacation and hadn't taken any business trips. Of course, he was lying all along, and I explained that I was afraid to tell you this. Megan, Kevin remarked, glancing between Susan and me. Susan encourages you to keep going. In fact, it appears like Jake has been growing close to a female subordinate named Maria, who also took leave at the same time. I asked if this was true, and it turns out that Kevin stole what he was about to divulge. A picture of Jake strolling through a hotel district with a young woman has been making the rounds at the workplace. Kevin showed us the picture on his phone and asked, thank you, may I have this picture? I inquired if I apologize, Megan. I've been reluctant to speak up until now since I felt guilty for introducing you. Kevin responded, it's not your fault. Kevin, by the way, do you know where this Maria lives? I inquired, I have a colleague who perhaps. Then he said, let me ask her. Immediately after parting ways with Kevin, he called a coworker who told us that Maria resided in a condo close to the next station. Thank you, Kevin. You've been a big help, I remarked. Susan honestly apologized to me. Megan, I really apologize for my son's behavior, but it's okay, Susan. You are not at fault. I'll present him with this proof, and I'll ensure that woman accepts responsibility as well. I responded, wait, Megan. This image alone might be written off as we need more hard proof, so let me do it. They were merely strolling together. Susan claimed that she called a local detective firm, which was known for carrying out investigations at a very quick pace, and they amazingly offered to pay for them to obtain conclusive evidence. Megan paces to see when he will return. Susan answered, okay, he just messaged me and will be back the day after tomorrow. Susan nodded when she heard this, and 2 days later when I was at home, Jake came back and said, I'm home. I asked how your mom was, and she said she was peaceful. She stated she feels lonely and wants me by her side, so I remarked, looks like I'll need to visit her more often. He said, that must be tough. The adjacent room's door suddenly sprang open as Jake was finishing up, asking, who's lonely and wants you by their side? Susan exclaimed, what, Mom? As she stepped outside. When Jake almost passed out from shock, Susan and I went up to him and asked, what's this? Why is Mom here? I assumed the two of you weren't too bad. We've reconciled, he muttered. Imagine our surprise when we were having lunch and received a call stating that Mom had collapsed. What have you been doing these past few days, and with whom? I asked Jake, who was speechless. I pushed Jake, who went pale and didn't say anything. When I saw no improvement, I eventually remarked, your business trip was a lie, wasn't it? Actually, it was a beautiful vacation with Maria, but Jake denied everything. Who is Maria? As anticipated, I showed him the picture of them in the hotel district that Kevin had sent me. Jake replied, "This was just after a drinking party. We just happened to walk by. She's just a subordinate, nothing more." Oh my goodness, then what's this? I pointed to another picture, which showed Jake leaving Maria's house and kissing her at the door. Why are you acting like you're on a business trip when you were on a romantic retreat and couldn't leave? Your mother hired a detective firm to get this picture from your mistress, who was lying to me and hanging about at her house. Jake stared at Susan in shock, and then she gave him a hard slap. You stupid son, you have a wonderful wife, and you're doing something. For example, have you forgotten that your father's affair was the reason for our divorce? It's disgusting that you only inherited that trait, Mom. I once discussed giving you my business, but you forgot it. Don't worry, you're not ready because I'm not going to accept you as my own. Jake cried out and knelt down in front of me after realizing he had no escape. Please pardon me, Megan. It was simply a moment of weakness. I vowed to be a better husband going forward, and I firmly informed him, don't be silly. You lied and betrayed me, and we are divorcing, and I will accept a reasonable settlement for your infidelity. But now you expect me to forgive you without question. After Susan ejected him from the house, leaving Jake stunned and moaning in desperation, the divorce between Jake and me was formalized. Hired an attorney, and I was awarded a substantial settlement that exceeded the usual divorce sum. I also claimed payment from Maria. Jake and Maria broke up as a result of Jake's mistress's affair and the issues that followed. Susan kindly handed me a substantial amount of money as compensation, but she persisted. It turned out that Jake was hired by Susan's connections, and she instructed the president of his company to fire him for misbehavior and disrupting business order by interacting with a subordinate. Jake was fired from his position with his savings that Susan renounced and that were exhausted by the divorce settlement. Now that I know that Jake lives in a dilapidated apartment and works as a day laborer without understanding the difference between day and night, I feel no pity for him. That's all I can think of. I relocated with the settlement funds and carried on writing. Susan and we now refer to one another by our monikers Susie and Meg. And occasionally, when traveling together, there appears to be a lot I value the additional knowledge I can gain from her. Helpful connection with Susan, and I want to lead a constructive life moving forward.